Hello everyone, it's Tori from Tori Story Creations, and in this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to crochet this adorable frog amigurumi. To crochet this frog, you're going to need the following materials. Green worsted weight yarn. I use the brand Loops and Threads Impeccable yarn in the shade Citron. A 3.25mm crochet hook. This is also a letter D crochet hook. Scissors. Sewing pins to keep the body parts in place as you sew them onto the frog's body. Black embroidery thread. A yarn needle for sewing the crocheted pieces together. Stitch markers. These are optional, but you'll see me using them throughout the tutorial. A pair of 6mm safety eyes, and Fiberfill stuffing. To get started, we're first going to crochet the eyes of our frog. This is what a completed eye looks like. We're going to crochet 2 of these. To crochet the eyes, you'll need your crochet hook, your green yarn, your 6mm safety eyes and backings, and you'll also need a stitch marker. If you don't have a stitch marker, you can use a scrap piece of yarn. For row 1, we're going to create a magic circle with 6 single crochet stitches. Once we've completed our magic circle, we'll have 6 stitches all the way around. So to get started, I'm going to grab the tail end of my yarn and hold my working yarn with my pinky finger. I'll then wrap the tail end of my yarn around my pointer and middle fingers 2 times. So 1, 2, and then I'll secure the loose tail end of my yarn with my ring finger. Once you've done that, you should have 2 loops on your finger, and then you should also have your working yarn closest to your palm. Now we're going to insert our hook in the first 2 loops around our finger, and then we're going to hook on to our working yarn. We're going to pull that working yarn underneath both of those loops on our finger. We'll have 1 loop around our hook. Then we're going to reach over and yarn over with our working yarn and pull that through the loop that's on our hook. Then I'm going to carefully grab all of the yarn that's around my fingers and slide it off both of those fingers. I'll take my working yarn and I'll give it a little tug to tighten the circle and tighten the loop around my hook. Once you've completed this step, you should have 1 loop around your hook, your working yarn, a yarn tail, and then 2 loops in the shape of a circle. For the next step, I'm going to start creating single crochet stitches inside of my circle. So I'm going to hold my circle steady. I'm going to take my hook, insert it into the circle. I'll yarn over with my working yarn, and I'll pull my hook back up through the circle. Once I've done that, I should have 2 loops on my hook. Then I'm going to yarn over with my working yarn, and I'll pull that through both of those loops on my hook. This created one single crochet in my circle. I'm going to do this another time, so I'll move my yarn tail out of the way, and I will insert my hook inside of a circle. I'll yarn over with my working yarn. I'll pull that hook back up through the circle. I'll have 2 loops on my hook at this point. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull that through both of the loops on my hook. This is the second single crochet I've created in my circle. So since we want 6 single crochets, I'm going to do this 4 more times. So now you'll see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches created in my circle. Now it's time to tighten the loops on my circle. So I'm going to grab my yarn tail and I'm going to pull it down towards me until I see one of these 2 loops start to move. So I'll grab my yarn tail, I'm going to pull it, and you can see that this top loop started to get smaller. Now I'm going to take this top loop and I'm going to pull it down towards me just like I did with my yarn tail. You should see the other loop start to close. I'm going to continue pulling the yarn towards me until that loop is mostly closed. Now my circle just has 1 loop on it. So I'm going to take my yarn tail again and pull that down towards me, and that should close both loops on my circle. Once you've completed that, your magic circle should look like this so far. The last step for this row is to create a slip stitch connecting the first stitch of the circle to the last stitch of the circle. So I'm going to insert my hook in the first stitch, yarn over, and pull through all loops on my hook. And that's a slip stitch. Now we've completed row 1. We should have a total of 6 stitches around our circle. At this point in time, I'm going to grab my stitch marker and place it at the last stitch on my circle. This allows me to keep track of where my last stitch of my row is so that I don't lose count. For row 2, we're going to increase in each stitch around our circle. Once we've completed row 2, we should have a total of 12 stitches around. So to do an increase, we're going to single crochet twice into each stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook in the first stitch. I'll yarn over and pull that up through the stitch. I'll have 2 loops on my hook. I'll yarn over and pull that yarn through both loops on my hook. And that's 1 single crochet. To complete our increase, I'm going to single crochet once more in that same exact stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook back into the first stitch of our row, yarn over, pull through. I'll have 2 loops on my hook. I'll yarn over and pull through both those 2 loops. Now we've completed one increase. I'm going to continue increasing in each stitch around my row. So I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through, reinsert my hook back into the same stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through both loops on my hook. So that is our second increase. Once I've hit my stitch marker, I'm going to take it off of my row, and I'm going to create one more increase since that marked the last stitch of the row. Now that I've completed row 2, I should have a total of 12 stitches around. For row 3, I'm going to single crochet in each stitch around my circle. Once I've completed row 3, I should have a total of 12 stitches around my circle. To single crochet, I'm going to insert my hook in the first stitch. I'll yarn over, pull that back up through the stitch, then I will yarn over and pull that through both loops on my hook. And that's one single crochet. I'm going to continue single crocheting in each stitch around my circle. Now that I've completed row 3, I should have a total of 12 stitches around my circle. If you notice that your yarn actually was curling up and your excess yarn tail was at the top, you want to make sure to flip the eye so that your tail is on the inside. At this point, you can actually trim your tail off. We're almost done crocheting the eye, but the last thing that I like to do is finish off my pieces with a slip stitch. So to do that, I'm going to insert my hook in the next stitch, yarn over, and pull through that stitch, and also pull through the loop on my hook. That just, to me, gives it a smoother transition from the end of the row to the beginning of the row. So now I'm going to trim my yarn, leaving a decently long piece of yarn so that I can use this to sew the eye onto my frog's body. And I'm going to pull the yarn through so I have one yarn tail. And now we've completed the crocheting part of the eye. Now we're going to get out our 6mm safety eyes and our back and attach this to the eye. And we want to place this between rows 2 and 3. So I'm going to count 1, 2, and this is row 3. So I'm going to find somewhere to place it right in the middle of those 2 rows. So now I've stuck the safety eye into the eye, and once I like the placement, I'm going to grab my backing and I'm going to secure it onto my safety eye to keep it in place. Be sure that the safety eye is placed where you want it, because once you secure the backing, it's really hard to get it off. And now we've completed crocheting our first eye. Repeat this process again so that you have 2 frog eyes. Next, we're going to work on crocheting the arms and legs of our frog. A finished arm or leg should look like this. For the first row, we're going to create a magic circle with 5 single crochets inside. To do that, we're going to grab our yarn, hold the working yarn towards your palm, then we're going to wrap the yarn around our fingers once and twice, and we'll hold the tail to our middle finger to keep it steady. Then we're going to take our hook, insert it underneath the first 2 loops. We'll hook on to our working yarn, which is closest to our palm, and we will pull that underneath those first 2 loops on our fingers. You should have 1 loop around your hook at this point. Then we're going to insert our hook underneath our working yarn again and pull that through the loop that was on our hook. Next, we should still have 1 loop around our hook. At this point, we're going to slide everything off of our fingers. So I would take a hold of your yarn and gently slide it off of your fingers. And then I'm going to take my working yarn and give it a little tug to tighten the loop around my hook. So now I have 1 loop on my hook, 2 loops that form our circle, my yarn tail down here, and then my working yarn. So I'm going to get my yarn tail out of the way because it looks a bit tangled. So I'll pull that a bit. And now we're going to create 5 single crochets inside of our circle. So to get started, I'm going to insert my hook through the circle, yarn over with my working yarn, pull that back up through the circle, and I should have 2 loops on my hook. Then I'll yarn over with my working yarn, and I'll pull that through both loops on my hook. That's my first single crochet. So I'm going to continue this 4 more times until I have a total of 5 single crochets in my circle. Now that I have a total of 5 single crochets in my circle, it's time to tighten up the circle. So to do this, I'm going to grab my yarn tail, and I'm going to pull it until I see one of these loops start to close up. So I'll notice that it's this loop right here. So I'm going to grab this loop and pull it down towards me. This will tighten up the other loop, and I want to completely tighten that loop closed. Next, I'll take my yarn tail and I'll pull it down towards me, which will close up this loop right here. Once you've tightened up each of the loops, your magic circle should look something like this. Now it's time to close the circle, and I'm going to do that by creating a slip stitch that joins the last stitch of my row to the first stitch. So to do that, I'm going to insert my hook underneath this first stitch. I'll yarn over with my working yarn, and I'll pull this through all loops around my hook. And that finishes off our row. Once you've completed row 1, you should have a total of 5 stitches around. For row 2, we're going to single crochet in each of the stitches around our circle, so 5 times. Once we've completed row 2, we should have a total of 5 stitches around. We have our first single crochet, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now you'll notice that my stitches have started to cave up and that my yarn tail is coming out of the top of my arm. So what I'm going to do is actually flip this around and kind of massage it into place so that you can start to see your circle of row 1, your magic circle, and then the single crochet row that we just created. Once you've completed row 2, you should have a total of 5 stitches around your circle. For row 3, we're going to single crochet in each stitch around our circle, and once we've completed row 3, we should continue to have a total of 5 stitches around. So I'm going to single crochet in the first stitch, two, 3, 4, and 5. Once you've completed row 3, your arm should look like this. Next, I'm going to fasten off with a slip stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, and pull through all of the loops on my hook. Then I'm going to take my scissors and cut a long tail so that I can use this tail to sew the arm onto my frog. So then I will pull the yarn through, and I'm also going to trim this inner tail from earlier. And now I've completed the first arm or leg for my frog. You're going to want to make a total of 4 of these, so create 3 more. Now it's time to crochet the body of our frog. In the middle of making the body of our frog, we're going to also sew on the mouth. So you're going to need your yarn needle, your crochet hook, scissors, your black embroidery thread, and also your green yarn. You'll also need a heaping pile of Fiberfill. For row 1, we're going to create a magic circle with 6 single crochets inside. To do this, I'm going to grab my yarn with my pinky, wrap it around my pointer and middle finger 2 times. 1, 2. I'll hold the tail with my ring finger so that my yarn stays in place. I'm going to take my hook, insert it under the first 2 loops on my fingers, hook onto this working yarn that's closest to my palm, and pull that underneath both loops on my fingers. I'll have 1 loop on my hook, and then I will yarn over with my working yarn and pull that through the loop that was on my hook. After doing that, I'll continue to have just one loop on my hook. So now I'm going to slide everything off of my fingers. I'll pull my working yarn to tighten the loop on my hook a bit. And then I'm going to start crocheting the 6 single crochets in my circle. So I'm going to insert my hook in the circle, yarn over with my working yarn, pull that back up through the circle. I'll have 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, pull through both loops on my hook. And now I have 1 single crochet in my circle. So I'm going to continue this 5 more times until I have a total of 6 single crochets. Once I have a total of 6 single crochets in my circle, it's time to tighten our circle. So I'm going to grab my yarn tail, and I'm going to pull my yarn tail towards me until I see one of these 2 loops start to move. This back loop started to move, so once I have that identified, I'm going to take that and I'm going to pull it down towards me. That will start to close up the other loop. And I want that loop to completely close so that I'm left with 1 loop of my circle. Then I'm going to take my yarn tail again and pull that down towards me. And that should close up the loop that I was just tugging a minute ago. So now I'm going to join the last stitch of my circle to the first stitch of my circle using a slip stitch. To do that, I'm going to insert my hook in the first stitch of the circle. I will yarn over with my working yarn and pull that through that first stitch and also through the loop that was on my hook. Once you've completed that, our magic circle is done and we should have a total of 6 stitches around. Since we're going to be crocheting this for a while, I'm going to grab my stitch marker and keep track of the last stitch of my row. So for row 2, I'm going to increase in each stitch around my circle. Once I've completed row 2, I should have a total of 12 stitches around. To do an increase, I'm going to single crochet twice in 1 stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook in the first stitch, yarn over, pull through. I should have 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, and pull that through both loops on my hook. So that's our first single crochet. So I'm going to insert my hook back into the same stitch, yarn over, pull through. I'll have 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, and pull through both those 2 loops. So now we've completed our first increase in our first stitch of our row. So now I'm going to continue increasing all the way around my circle until I get to the end. I'm going to insert my hook in the next stitch, single crochet, reinsert my hook back into that stitch, and do another single crochet. Once I've completed row 2, I should have a total of 12 stitches around my circle. For row 3, I'm going to single crochet in the first stitch and then increase in my second stitch. I'm going to repeat this pattern 5 more times, so a total of 6 times, until I reach the end of my row. So I'll single crochet, and then I'll increase just 2 single crochets in the same stitch, and then I'll repeat this all the way around. Once I've completed row 3, I should have a total of 18 stitches around my circle. For row 4, I'm going to single crochet in the first 2 stitches, and then I'm going to increase in the next stitch. I'll repeat this pattern 5 more times until I reach the end of my row. Once I've completed row 4, I should have a total of 24 stitches around. Do 1 single crochet, 2 single crochet, and an increase. Then I'm going to repeat this pattern all the way around my circle. Now that I've completed row 4, I should have a total of 24 stitches around. For row 5, I'm going to single crochet in the first 3 stitches, and then I'll increase in the next stitch. I'll repeat this pattern 5 more times until I reach the end of my circle. Once I've completed row 5, I should have a total of 30 stitches around. So I'm going to single crochet, 1, 2, 3 stitches, and now I'm going to increase in the next stitch. So that's 2 single crochets in the same stitch. And I'll repeat that pattern all the way around my circle. Once I've completed row 5, I should have a total of 30 stitches around. For the next 5 rows, rows 6 through 10, I'm going to single crochet in each stitch around my circle. Once I've completed each of these rows, I should have a total of 30 stitches around. Once you've completed row 10, you should have a total of 30 stitches around. And your frog body should look like this. Now it's time to sew the mouth onto your frog. Get out your black embroidery thread and cut yourself a piece. Next, you're going to grab your yarn needle and you're going to thread it with your black embroidery thread. I believe these needles are also called tapestry needles. So once you've threaded your needle, you're going to grab your frog body. You're going to find an area where you'd like to place the mouth, and you're going to count 4 rows down from the top of your frog body. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. We are going to create our mouth in the middle of row 4, so around this area. So if you look closely, I can see 1 stitch, which looks like a V, here, and I can see 2 small spaces on either side of the stitch. I'm going to take my yarn needle, insert it up through the body, and try to get it in those little spaces next to my stitch. Can take a little bit of working to get there. There we go. And I'm going to insert it up through the middle of my 4th row and pull through, but not all the way through. I want to leave some thread in the inside of my frog so that I can tie it secured once I'm done embroidering the mouth on. So now I have my thread coming out of my frog in the middle of my 4th row, and I'm going to move over 1 stitch to that other space on the other side of my stitch, and I'm going to insert my hook down through there. And I'll pull it through, and I'll pull this until I get a small, very small U shape. And if you pull too tight, you can use your needle to make a small U shape. And this is going to be the shape of our mouth. So now we're going to sew the bottom of the mouth in place. Insert your needle up through the body, making sure it's at the center of this U shape. Then I'm going to pull my yarn up through that. Next, I'm going to insert my needle back down through the frog, making sure that it's at the bottom side of this mouth U shape. This will secure the bottom of the mouth in place so that it retains the U shape. So you want to insert it fairly close to where you just came up. You're going to pull your needle through. And now you've created the mouth of your frog. So now you're going to fasten off your thread and trim the loose edges. I'm going to grab my thread and I will tie a knot to fasten it off. You might have to make your frog inside out in order to do this a little easier. Then I'm going to trim off the edges of my embroidery thread. And then I'll flip my frog back in place. Now we've completed sewing on the mouth of our frog and it's time to continue crocheting. For row 11, we're going to single crochet in each stitch around. Once we've completed row 11, we should have a total of 30 stitches. Once we've completed row 11, we should have a total of 30 stitches around. For row 12, we're going to single crochet in the first 3 stitches, and then we're going to decrease. We're going to repeat this pattern 5 more times until we reach the end of our row. Once we've completed our row, we should have a total of 24 stitches around. So I'm going to single crochet in the first 3 stitches. So that's 1, 2, and 3. And now I'm going to decrease. There are many different ways to decrease, but I prefer to insert my hook in the first loop of my stitch, so the loop closest to me. Yarn over, pull through just that loop, and then insert my hook in the next stitch, just that front loop again, yarn over, pull through. After this step, we should have a total of 3 loops on our hook. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. Now I'm going to repeat this pattern all the way around my row. So I'm going to single crochet 1, 2, 3 times, and then I'm going to decrease by inserting my hook in the front loop of my next stitch, yarning over, pulling through so I have 2 loops on my hook, and then I'm going to insert my hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, and I'll have 3 loops on my hook. Then I'll yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. And this is basically joining 2 stitches together to create 1 stitch. So I'll continue repeating this process all the way around. Once you've completed row 12, you should have a total of 24 stitches around. For row 13, we're going to single crochet in the first 2 stitches, and then we're going to decrease. We'll repeat this pattern 5 more times until we reach the end of our row. After we've completed row 13, we should have a total of 18 stitches around. So to get started, I'm going to single crochet in the first stitch, single crochet in the second stitch, and then I will decrease. So I'll insert my hook in the front loop of the first stitch, yarn over, pull through, and I'll have 2 loops around my hook. Then I will insert my hook in the front loop of the next stitch, yarn over, pull through. I'll have a total of 3 loops around my hook. I'll yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops to join those stitches together. I'll repeat this pattern all the way around my row. Once I've completed row 13, I should have a total of 18 stitches around. Now would be a good time to trim this tail that's inside of our frog's body. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to snip that off. For row 14, we're going to single crochet in the first stitch and then we will decrease. We'll repeat this pattern 5 more times until we get to the end of our row. Once we've completed row 14, we should have a total of 12 stitches around. So I'm going to single crochet, decrease, single crochet, decrease, and continue repeating. Once we've completed row 14, you should have a total of 12 stitches around. Next, it's time to stuff the body of our frog. So grabbing your Fiberfill, take chunks of your Fiberfill and fill up the body of your frog. You'll be surprised that even though this circle is super small, it does take quite a large amount of Fiberfill. Once you've stuffed your frog, it should be pretty firm and full. Next, we're going to continue crocheting so that we close up this circle. For row 15, we're going to decrease 6 times. Once we've completed row 15, we should have a total of 6 stitches around. So I'm going to decrease once, twice, and 6th time. Now that I've completed row 15, I should have a total of 6 stitches around. Next, I'm going to slip stitch in the very next stitch. So I'll insert my hook into that stitch, yarn over, and pull through that stitch and also the loop that's on my hook. Then I'm going to cut my yarn, and you're going to want to leave enough so that you can get it threaded to your yarn needle and then sew the hole closed. So you don't need too much. I'm going to pull my yarn hook, grab my yarn needle, and I'm going to thread it with this tail that we just trimmed. And then I'm going to sew this hole closed. I'll secure it with a knot. And then I'm going to insert my needle through the body and out the other side of the body. Pull that through. I'll grab my scissors and I will trim this piece of yarn very close to the body. And once I cut this, the yarn that we pulled through the body will go back into the body and be hidden from sight. Once you finish crocheting your frog's body, it should look like this. Now that we've completed the eyes, arms and legs, and body of our frog, it's time to sew all the pieces in place. For this step, we're going to need our yarn needle, our frog's eyes, all 4 arms and legs, our frog's body, and a pair of scissors. Optionally, we'll need sewing pins. I use sewing pins to place the body parts onto my body and hold it in place while I sew each of the pieces. If you don't want to use sewing pins or you don't have them on hand, you can place each piece onto your frog one by one and hold it in place as you sew around. So let's get started. So first I'm going to pin the eyes into place. I like to place my eyes about 1.5 rows from the very center of the top of the head. So around here. And once I like the placement, since I'm using sewing pins, I'm going to pin the eye in place. Next, I'm going to take the other eye, and I'm also going to pin this eye in place just so I can get a feel of how my frog will look with both eyes on. This will help make sure that they're not too close to each other or not too far away. I think I like this placement right about here, so I'm going to pin this eye into place. Once you like where both eyes are placed, you can sew the eyes onto your body using your yarn tail. So you'll thread your yarn needle, and now it's time to get sewing. So in general, I just like to hook on to a piece of yarn from the body. And then matching where I just inserted my hook and hooked onto a stitch from the body, I'm going to insert my hook in the stitch of the eye. And this will sew those two together. And when I reach a pin, I'll just take it out. So again, I'll insert my hook to grab hold of a stitch here on the body. Pull my yarn through, and I'll also insert my hook up through the stitch on the eye that matches the stitch from the body. and I will continue sewing all the way around the eye. Once you've sewn all the way around your eye, it's time to fasten the eye off. By tying a knot so that you secure your yarn. And then you're going to insert your yarn inside of your frog's body and out a different end. Then you're going to take your scissors and trim off the excess yarn. And you have sewn one of your eyes onto your frog body. Next, you're going to also sew the other eye onto the body. And now I've completed sewing the eyes onto my frog. Next, we're going to sew the arms and legs into place. Starting with the arms, I place them about one row apart from the eyes. So about here. So once I like the placement of this, I'm going to pin it to the body. I'm going to do the same thing with the other arm. For the legs, I place them about 4 rows below the arms. It can get a little crowded, but it does help me determine where exactly I want to sew each piece onto the frog's body. Once you like the placement of the arms and legs, you can sew each of the pieces onto your frog's body. Once you finish sewing all of the body parts onto your froggy friend is complete. Congratulations! I know you did a great job. Thank you so much for following this Froggy Friend tutorial. If you like this tutorial, please give this video a thumbs up. If you want to see more tutorials from me, please subscribe to my channel. Lastly, I'd love to see the frogs that you've made with this video, so feel free to tag @Tori Creations with pictures of the frogs that you've made. Thank you and see you next time.